Well, hello, friends, neighbors. John, your wish neighbor here, and welcome to another special Tuesday. With me today is Gordon from Odd Society Spirits. Gordon, welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Oh, I'm glad. We were talking about doing this last spring, and then I don't know if you know, but I'm in education. This whiskey is a lovely hobby. I really enjoy learning more, but I'm in education, and so I kind of disappear through summer, and so you and I struggle to find a time. So I'm just so thankful that you came back in September and were able to talk whiskey a little bit.
Yes, it's a good time. The fall's coming, so it's a good time to talk whiskey.
I agree. I totally agree. And as people will tune in later and whatnot, I would like to set the stage a bit. So just for people, now we'll do broad a little bit, and then I'll probably ask a few questions. Well, I will for sure, Gordon. Is just first tell me a bit about, who you are in terms of the Odd Society Spirits. Like, where are you? Where can people find you? Where are your spirits? And then just giving you a heads up, I'm going to ask a bit about your journey, Gordon. Like, how did you become a distiller? But first, set the stage. Who is Odd Society Spirits?
So, Odd Society Spirits is a craft distillery. We're located in Vancouver, East Vancouver, sort of used to be a bit of a sketchy area. In our neighborhood is quite interesting. It's a little bit industrial, so there's about 12 breweries within about 8 blocks of us, and one other distillery. So, and we're actually part of an association called East Van because we're all fermenting. We've been around. We're a craft.
Wait, Gordon, did you say Yeast Van? I thought it was East Vancouver.
It is, but our association is Yeast Van.
I love it already.
Yeah. So and we're a craft distillery. I'm sure many of you know, but British Columbia has some special rules where there's 2 categories: craft and commercial. To be craft, 100% of the grain that we use has to be grown in British Columbia. So we're not allowed to buy from Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Washington. We have to ferment on site and distill on site. And so in return, we get a huge tax break. And there's also a ceiling on our production. We're allowed to do up to 100,000 liters a year. So that makes us craft. And I think I mentioned, but we've been around for 11 years now.
Yeah, no, and I've talked now. I've had the good fortune of talking with a few fellows like yourself in a craft basis, and it comes up pretty quick. Things like tax breaks or other things that actually make it even possible to be a smaller distiller. I would say though, I'm in Alberta, and I have had the good fortune of being at a BC distilled, which I felt really celebrates what you described: local grain, local distilling, local craft. And I felt that was really awesome. Like, honestly, going around the tables, hearing the heart and soul that's coming out in BC, I'm really hoping, and maybe there isn't, they just haven't invited me, but I'm hoping that sense really develops in Alberta. Is that an encouragement for yourself about, like, to have other distillers? You mentioned you're part of Yeast Van, but even going out of Van, like, do you feel there's a good group supporting each other in distilling?
Yeah, totally. I think there is a community of distillers. The industry hasn't been around that long, and if I have a question or whatever, I can ask somebody else how they're doing something, and or even if we're short on bottles or something. For a while it was a bit of a shortage. I could call someone up and say, hey, do you have any, you can sell me or lend me or whatever, so there's a great community for sure, which helps a lot.
Yeah, and that's good to hear. And I felt it even as a welcome outsider.
Yes.
Gordon, I tried to warn you a little bit, but one of my interests in talking to people like yourself, people making whiskey, and I'll show already, we'll go through this in detail later, but I have a sample of, I believe, single malt that's maybe finished or aged in a maple cask. You'll correct me, I'm sure I'm wrong. I've got a sample of a special release you guys put out on Robbie Burns Day every year. And then you've sent me a really lovely kit for me. I've got a Prospector Rye and a Commodore single malt. The reason why I want to just interrupt before I ask some questions more about your journey is I want anyone who's tuning in to see, like, these are the spirits that we're going to talk to. We can talk about other ones as well, but I wanted to get a sense of the range that you guys are making in terms of whiskey.
Just 2 secs here. Something's there. We go. Yeah, so the Commodore and the Prospector are our 2 core whiskeys. So we have a single malt, 100% malted barley, and then we have the rye, which is 100% rye. So those we always have those, and then we do a lot of different one-offs and experimental whiskeys. So we probably at the moment have like 6 or 8 whiskeys that are specialty whiskeys or one-offs or.
Okay, and so since you commented on the Prospector and the Commodore single malts and rye, and here's a specialty. Like I'm really hoping we'll open it together a little later. But like this is the one that's Robbie Burns, right? What's special about this? Also, it's celebrating the Bard, of course.
Yes. So and. I studied in Scotland, so, and of course, Robbie Burns Day is such a huge event over there, and people drink a lot of whiskey. And so we thought it'd be fun to do a Robbie Burns release, a peated release. And so if I talk about how, I guess should I just dive right in? Because it's really weird how we make it or how we're able to make it.
Well, let's come back and talk about the strange way you make Robbie Burns celebratory whiskey, but you just seeded something that I wanted to know a little bit about, and our audience will come along with us, which is, can you tell me a bit about your background? Like you mentioned you went to Scotland. Can you tell me a little more, like,
so
you get to Scotland, or why'd you go to Scotland?
Yeah, so I'll go sort of way back. So I was actually born in Edmonton, born and raised in Edmonton. And the beginning of distillation for me was way back when, and I really don't know why. My mom heard somewhere that my parents were immigrants from Germany, Eastern Europe, and had heard somewhere there was something wrong with Edmonton drinking water. And so my mom went out and bought a still. And then for a couple of years, she would distill the family drinking water. And then the water would go in the fridge. My brothers, I had 3 brothers, and I, 4 of us, you're supposed to grab water from the fridge. You don't drink it from the tap. And so, but the interesting thing was we had a still there. And so like around that, of course, was around high school age. And my brothers and I started making beer and wine. And so then one day we just sort of, the light went on and we saw the still, and we started distilling beer and wine with the family water still, and unbeknownst to my parents. And then and that was how it kind of started. And that, I think that, so it's kind of, that's where it started. So I sort of blame my mother, like she got us going.
I love that. I know we're going to go over to how you got to Scotland, but I'd really love it that, like, a lot of teenagers just end up sipping a bit out of their parents' cabinet here and there. Nope, you made it. You was like, no, hey, we can make something.
It was, I have to say, it was pretty awful. There was no such thing as cuts or anything. It was just straight distillation.
Everyone's got to start somewhere, Gordon. Everyone has to start somewhere.
Yeah. And
carry on. Sorry, I interrupted, but yes.
No, and then a lot of years went by, and then I worked as a technical writer, and I saw what was going on in the U.S. With all the sort of followed what was happening in the U.S. and just thought one day I was just surfing on the net, and I saw the program at Harriet Watt, and I decided, I called my wife. I said, I know what I want to do now, And so, anyway, so we went to Edinburgh, and then I did the Masters in Brewing and Distilling in Scotland. And then came back and then worked on starting the distillery.
That's fantastic. And there's another fantastic in there, which is you went to your wife, said, I know what I want to do. And you went to Edinburgh, not like, I know what I want to do. And I was like, well, that's great, but I need you to go get a paycheck. So no, I'm just
Yeah, my wife is very supportive. So yeah,
that's
she,
awesome.
she just wanted me to be happy. So there we go.
That's fantastic. So so you came back, you were doing technical writing, you went over, you learned the craft.
Yeah.
You came back, and how did you find friends or family or someone to say, hey, I can partner with you, let's get this going, or how did you get going?
Yeah, it was kind of, we got back and we started to look for a space to rent, and we finally found a space, and then it took about a year and a half, just getting equipment, but just battling with regulations and getting the space up to snuff. By the time we opened our doors was a year and a half later, and then one like about a year after or actually about 6 months after we'd opened, one of my colleagues from that I met at Harriet Watt, he came and joined Odd Society, and he was worked at Odd Society for a couple of years, and then he's gone to Ontario and started his own distillery. So, but for a couple of years, he was also with us at Joshua Beach.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I had help in the beginning, at the sort of the crucial stages where you're setting everything up.
Yeah. That's good. Now, as I kind of warned, at about 10 minutes, I like to be sipping whiskey, and you provided 4 bottles. So let's, if you don't mind, do you have any Commodore? I thought maybe start with a single malt, if that would be okay.
Yeah. Is it here? Yeah, I have it as well, and I got a bigger bottle, so.
No complaints about this. So I have the single malt here, Commodore, on what I can see is 46%. But
yes,
you could tell me a lot more about how you put together a single malt. Share with us a little bit, do you use unique yeast? Of course, yeast, of course you do. But is that what you want to highlight, or do you want to highlight your still or your fermentation time, or what do you want to tell me about this Commodore single malt?
Yeah. So, every one of those things that you mentioned can have an influence on what you end up with, and so it's kind of like a lot of trial and error. We of course for single malt we use 100% malted barley, and the one thing about craft in BC is because the grain has to be grown in British Columbia, we're quite limited in our choice of malt, because there's really, now there's 2, but there's really only one big malting company, and so we get BC Pale Malt is really our only choice.
Okay.
So 100%, and then we do a fairly long fermentation. We're about 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
And we're using sort of a very traditional yeast. A lot of Scottish distilleries use it, called M1.
Okay.
It's a very common yeast in Scotland. And then as we get older, our whiskeys get older. So I think that the one that we're trying right now is about 4.5 years old. So
okay. And first thoughts already. I don't want to rush it here for us, but it's actually I'm getting quite a nice fruity notes, light notes, a little aromatics. It's nosing really well for me. It's opening up.
Yeah.
Now, I interrupted you. Is this ex-bourbon casking? I'm getting a little bit of vanilla in there. I would guess something like ex-bourbon, but there could be some new oaks in here. What's your casking like?
Yeah, so we don't, for the single malt, we don't use new barrels, but our barrels are generally, originally they were ex-bourbon, and we still have some that are ex-bourbon barrels. But what we do now is that our rye, which we'll probably try a little bit later, uses, we age the rye in all brand new barrels. And so we have kind of like our own barrel program where we put the rye in our brand new barrels, we age the rye, and then we dump those barrels, we reuse those for our single malt.
So this you said, like, you've been open for a little while, so it's a little older, 4 or 5 years, somewhere in there.
Yes.
But are you saying this isn't ex-bourbon anymore? This 4 or 5-year-old is
this probably has,
bourbon, but then rye, and now single malt.
Yeah, this is there's probably some ex-bourbon barrels used for this one.
Okay.
But as we're moving, as time goes on, more and more will just be the ex-rye barrels, our own ex-rye barrels. We get the barrels from Kentucky, but then we use them. We use our barrels twice for the single malt. So,
okay, I'm still getting a really nice, light caramels, but sweet. A little bit, like, I'm going to say floral, but I don't have a specific reference to that. But when I find a nose that really fills my room, fills where I'm going, then I use that descriptor. It's probably not the right descriptor. It's probably sweet vanilla. It's probably a little bit of ginger, that kind of thing, or maybe a bit more accurate. But I'm just saying, for me, it's right there. Should we have a sip together?
Yes, absolutely. Cheers.
Cheers to your health. Oh, and Gordon, I'm sure that my tasting notes are all wrong. And please just tell me, no, John, no one's ever tasted that. But I want to say the palate actually went, like, I thought it was going to be, I thought it was tending towards something really sweet. I thought, I'm going to get caramels and toffees and whatnot, because I was kind of getting that on the nose. I didn't get that in the palate. I have to say it was malty and slight cereal oat note, almost like a little bit of, I don't want to say grainy, but it's something like I'm getting a little bit more truer to a younger barley malt. That, and definitely, like, it really brought itself to what I'm looking for in a single malt, and less of the fruit. It's still there, but it's just less that way.
Yeah. But I always taste a little, like, for me, I get a little, like, there's a viscosity that generally our stuff has, there's a rich mouthfeel, and there's a little bit of sweetness, that sort of comes through a lot of our stuff.
I can agree with a bit of sweetness, but I just don't. I'm saying the nose I thought was going to lead me into a real toasted sugar, like a real, that kind of thing, and I'm getting sweet in the sense of that sweetness from a good malt, like malt sugars, but not sweetness like I don't know. Anyways, I don't want to overplace. This is a very nice malt. It's got a good mouthfeel, as you described. Now, mouthfeel, when I have that, makes me wonder, are you guys chill filtering, or are you letting the oils and waxes kind of come across?
So that's a good question. So we, if you follow the strict definition of chill filtering, where you're going to cool something down to almost freezing and then filter it, we don't do that. But in fact, we do chill it a little bit.
Right.
We take it maybe to 6 or 8 degrees Celsius and then give it a filter at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's, I don't know what you call that,
Why do you feel, because you're releasing it 46%, so it's not about keeping it clear and not cloudy when it gets a little cold.
Yeah.
Do you feel there are something that you're looking to sort of remove when you do a bit of filtering?
We're kind of funny with our filtering. We've generally found over the years that when we do before and after tests, I would say 90% of the time, or even more, we like it better after the filtration. The flavor, it tastes for us a bit finer, a bit, and I know that's a bit, that's a bit controversial or whatever, but when we do our before and after, we're always so we've just adopted that as part of our process. You know what I mean? And
and if I may, like, I feel and obviously you do because you're making the whiskey just the way you want to. But I really feel people who make whiskey as yourself need to release well, I encourage would release a whiskey that you're enjoying. This is how I think it's tasting finer. And
Yeah.
if your team, you're doing tasting, you're like, you know what? If we filter a little bit, not the strictest chill as you describe, but it just comes off in a profile that we love or enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that makes sense. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weirdly, sometimes we've even had like it can, if there's a little bitterness or something, it just somehow it's quite fine filtered, so it just works for us. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, now we've opened up whiskey, and as I've said to a few people before, once you open up whiskey, and not that I just would like to have another. So, should we stay in single malt, and that would be we could go sweet to this ex maple.
Sure, absolutely.
I would suggest that, or we could go to peat, but I prefer to have peat a little bit later. Is that all right?
I would say go to the maple. Yeah.
Okay. So, what can you tell me about us? We've got people can see it's ex maple syrup barrels. What does that mean to you guys? What does that look like?
So, this first is a release that we do every Christmas. So, October, November, December, we'll have a big release. So what we did was there's a distillery in Washington called Woodinville, and they make bourbon, a lot of bourbon. They're known for their bourbon, but with some of their barrels, once they dump them, they refill them with maple syrup. And they age the maple syrup for several months, and then from their distillery, they sell this bourbon barrel-aged maple syrup, which is phenomenal, super tasty. But once they dump those barrels, they've got these sticky barrels. So over the years, we bought a lot of their ex-bourbon, ex-maple syrup barrels, and so we took those and just put our whiskey in them.
Nice.
And let it age.
Now that explains how you get a nice sticky barrel. But this also says smoked malted barley, like distilled with maple wood smoked malted. Can you talk about the smoked malted barley? Like that's what I want to know a little bit about too.
So that's some of the whiskey aged in ex maple syrup barrels.
Yeah.
And then we have some, and we have a whole series of whiskeys that we call smoke and oak, where we get where we have the malt smoked with different woods, local wood. So this one, exactly. So that one is beechwood, and so but the maple one has some of the malts been smoked with maple wood, and so we were actually maybe going to call it double maple, the smoke from the maple wood. And
smoked maple wood and in an ex maple syrup barrel. I could see that. That's not a bad name. Yeah.
So we just wanted to sort of balance some of the sweetness. The whiskey, the maple whiskey, people think maple and you're thinking it's going to be super sweet, but it's definitely not a super sweet whiskey. And it's balanced by some of that smoke from the smoked malt.
Okay, well then I better nose it if it's not going to be too sweet.
Well,
okay, but it is sweeter on the nose. I know I made a big deal of the floral nose on your single malt, but this is definitely sweeter. Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
And here, I mean, it's staring right at me: maple wood, maple syrup. So I'm thinking maple, but I would say if you just put this in front of me blind, I might in the nose get almost like some toasted brown sugars in there too. Like I'm saying a sweetness, but
totally, it's got that.
Actually, it's very nice. Let's try this one too. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Oh, I like where you've taken this, and I'll tell you why. I get almost more coating in this one, which is interesting. You made comment on that in your Commodore, but this one really, really was nice and waxy and coating in the mouthfeel. So it's got that fullness, and it's light. And in the finish, I am getting whatever that kiss of smoked. Like I didn't get that in the malt, but I am absolutely getting a bit of like you talk about this different series of smoked oak, but it's absolutely for me already in that early finish. Wow.
Yeah. It's sort of it dries out the whiskey at the end, you know. So
Yeah.
it's not sweet all the way. You'll get a nice smokiness in the finish.
Well, and I've had now a few whiskeys. I don't think I've had a single malt in an ex maple syrup cask. But I have had some other whiskeys, and they're on a spectrum of some of them really are sweet maple syrup. I think they're going for that, right?
Yeah, totally.
But like this one, I would say it's as you described. It doesn't scream lots of extra sugars, you know, maple syrup running down the glass. It's not like you took your single malt and put maple syrup in it, which is what I think some people think.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And I would absolutely say, especially that kind of drying, lightly smoky. I don't want to overplay it. I'm not talking like this is a heavily peated, smoked, that kind of thing, but it's present in the conversation for me. And at the end, which then kind of brings it back into the second sip and so on.
Yeah. It's
So who had the idea to get some nice sticky barrels and try it out?
I think, I don't know. I think we visited Woodinville a couple times, and we bought some of their maple syrup, and they told us how it was made and that. And so I think we just thought, hey, let's try this. You know, let's see what that's like. And yeah,
Awesome.
Yeah,
right
on. We try a lot of things, and some work better than others.
Well, and I have to say, I know it wasn't on our tasting flight, but when I heard about how you were staying true to your craft, using BC grains, distilling and whatnot, and then you were using, I know this is not super technically exactly accurate, but I'm just going to say it for anybody who knows anything about distilling, maybe like a gin basket almost of different
exactly.
smoked malts or whatnot. And so that way you weren't distilling the other stuff. You were staying true to your craft. I thought, how creative is that? Like,
we did. We found a loophole because, you know, as I mentioned, we're a bit restricted, you know, in terms of what we can use as ingredients, right? So we came up with, it was Joel who does, all our distilling now. I've told this story before, but we just standing in front of the gin basket, and we were talking about peated and saying, you know, we can never make a peated one because there's no peated malt, you know, produced in British Columbia. And then he said, well, what if we put it in a gin basket like we put lemons?
Yeah.
You know, and then we throw the malt away. So we haven't technically used it to make the alcohol, which is how it's written in the rules, right?
Yeah.
So that one uses the Rauch malt, which is the German, which they do the Rauch beer.
Yeah.
The smoky beechwood beer.
Yeah. No, I really like this. I appreciate that I was able to taste that. Okay, we're going on a journey. We've got 2 more samples to get to. Or no, we don't have to. I'm just saying. Now, here's a tough one for me, because usually in a flight, it's pretty easy to go and enter in single malt in the sense that, like, not a wildly different cask, not a wild whatever. And then we went to a single malt that was, ex maple, so that has a different effect. But now I've got a different grain in this one. We could go to rye, or we could go to a peated single malt. And my challenge in a tasting is whenever I throw in peat, I usually tend to stay peat, because I'll tell you the next whiskey, I'm still going to be tasting peat.
Yeah.
So what do you think we should do?
This one isn't too crazy. I would say maybe we stay with the single malts and finish with the peated, and and then move to the rye.
It's not my first flight, Gordon. I'll figure out what I'm getting out of the rye. So this is, does it appear on the shelf like this with the handwriting and the information?
Yeah, so it appears like that in a 750 bottle, but that's the same label where,
Okay.
and we've done a lot of whiskeys when they are very small one-offs that we use that generic label and just do a lot of writing to say what it is, and we have
Okay, so malted barley, peated, 46%, released for Toast in the Bard, Robbie Burns Day. Can you share the peat level? Like what are we?
I don't. So we just talked about the basket method. Where we put, and so that's what happened with this one. So we got heavily peated malt from Baird's Malt in Scotland.
Yeah.
And then put that in the gin basket, and then in the final distillation, ran the vapors through the gin basket.
Right.
And it's always been kind of shocking in a way how much flavor you get out, because we use a single bag of peated malt. Whereas if you're like in Scotland, if you're doing a peated malt, you're going to use, I don't know, depending on your recipe, a quarter is going to be, or a half is going to be peated malt.
Right.
Whereas
bags and bags and bags of peated malt.
Really. And so for us, there's a lot of different advantages, because our same equipment is like, if we're doing a vodka next or something, we couldn't do a peated, in our equipment.
Right.
Because we'd have to spend days trying to get that oily, peaty flavor out, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have to do that. We don't deal with that except in the gin basket. And also, it's a price thing too. Like one bag of peated versus 10 or 15 bags. It helps. Yeah.
So I'll just do a total unofficial nosing here of Kilkerran heavily peated. So this is going to have lots of peat.
Oh yeah, that'll be a lot. Yeah.
And
ours will be much lightly.
Just to reassure, I didn't taste any of it because then my mouth wouldn't recover. This is a lighter peat, absolutely.
Yeah, so I don't know if and when or when we'll release it, but because we do the way we do, we thought, we're going to try and do the heaviest peated whiskey in the world. Oh, so what we're playing around, but
how are you going to manage that?
We're not quite there yet, but so what we do is we put a bag of peated malt in the gin basket, run the still for a little bit, then stop it, empty the gin basket, put a fresh bag in the gin basket, run it again, stop it, put a fresh bag, because to get more of that intense flavor. And we thought, okay. And then there's a place in Denmark that does a lot of testing for a lot of the distilleries in Europe. And they said, they could, if we send them the sample, they could tell us, how it compares to the Scottish.
The
whiskeys and
maybe even give you a ppm number, because that's the Octomore is here, which I don't have a bottle, or I would have put it here and I would have said, you're going up against these guys because they are cranking the peat.
Yeah. So this is, compared to that, this is super, super light.
Now, I don't know if this is an association that I need to work against or not, or you can tell me. Often, and I thought it was a core characteristic of certain Islay distilleries, that I get lemon with that, but I'm already getting almost a little bit of souring on the nose. Like I'm getting a bit of peat, a bit of smoke, but more peat than smoke, I would say. And it get a little bit of like, is that more lemon? Now, is that me? Is that my issue I got to work through?
I always say, with our stuff, you get like, in a good way, I hope, but like a funky, like a barnyard. I say it smells.
Okay.
Sometimes you get a smell a bit of with our peated stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just total sidebar. Sorry, I went back and went just a single malt, and you said barnyard. I'm like, well, maybe grain. Like I'm getting a little more here, but and then this maple one came back, and it was like a richer, a bit of a Christmas spice, a bit of an almost cinnamon. And I'm not saying that's in there. I'm just saying that memory was evoked as I went through the different styles. Very interesting. So funk. Okay, I'm in. That's good. Let's try this one. Cheers.
So,
Oh, that's nice. Especially, we talked earlier about how it's getting a little cooler. It's nice to think whiskey. The weather turns a little bit windy. This would be a little bit windy whiskey. This would be good for that.
yeah, it's fun to play with. Yeah, and actually, I hope we can do it for the. I'm not sure if we will, but we actually been working with some local peat, from Burns Bog, and so for this Robbie Burns, we're hoping to release a local peated whiskey.
Yeah. And as often the case, you open up your experience. It's not your palate anymore, but I have a sip, and then now I nose it again, and I'm getting a lot more layers. Like, it just seems to kind of tumble around a bit better. Oh, that is very nice. Wow. And as you started, the mouth feels great. Is there a particular note that comes out? You mentioned kind of a barnyard funk. That resonates. Is there something else in the peated note that for you is kind of a flavor note that like, oh yeah, this is ours. I know what this is.
I'm not sure about the peated, but I still get, a little bit of, before it dries out. I find our stuff has a bit of sweetness. You get that middle mouthfeel. You're getting, which is not always there in other peated whiskeys. Where they're sort of like they're drier, whereas ours, and I don't know where that sort of comes from.
I'll have to keep sipping and searching for that exact moment when it turns sweet before it dries, because I still do get a little bit of, as Pete does, it's a little bit, it's nice in the after conversation. This is the kind of thing that, again, the glass later when it's empty, you'll nose it, it'll be like, oh yeah, that was a good one right there. Yeah. Okay, well, let's keep moving, and let's talk about the Prospector Rye.
Yeah, so we wanted to do a rye, of course, being where we are and everything. The thing about Canadian rules is they're so, compared to other countries, we're pretty vague and wishy-washy. Like we don't really define it, like,
right.
Bourbon, you have to have 51% corn, or whatever, it's a straight rye, you got to have 51% rye.
Yep.
Whereas in Canada, I know one of them that I always laugh about, it says, must have the characteristic flavor of rye. And so what is that really? So, most rye whiskeys, there's no specified amount. So you could have 5% rye, you could have 10% rye, and then corn and wheat, and call it a rye. So that's why we, way back when, we thought, okay, we're just going to go all out. And can I ask what batch you have there? Does it say
where am I going to find that information?
On the back?
On the back. I do not see a batch number.
All right. No
Pioneering Spirit, 100% BC rye.
It wasn't written on. Oh yeah. I guess it wasn't written on there. Yeah. We write it on there now. So it's just curious because some batches are slightly different than others.
Yeah. Well, and as I 100% Northern BC rye, and I also say, I've got a couple of bottles in my collection, Canadian rye, that I know because I have talked to the people who put it together, have said, actually, there's no rye in there. None whatsoever. Not a drop. It's 100% corn whiskey, but but John, it has the characteristics of rye. It has the spice palette. It has the flavor. And under our laws, as you said, we can call it rye. And there's a couple of things in Canadian whiskey law that I wish we would just change. Like, it doesn't have to have any fanfare. It can just happen. I'm not saying it has to be 100% rye. I love that this is. There's a lot of rye on my shelf back here that is 100%. But happy to say at least 51, at least something. So that when you pick up a bottle and it says rye, it's rye.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, and I think that's why a lot of the, the smaller distilleries decided to go that route, and let's try 100% rye.
Well, I have to say, I'm glad you did what you did in terms of steering me through peat and the other single malts, only because peat isn't a peat monster, and this rye is absolutely stands out as different. You pour me this blind, and if I didn't say it was a rye, there's a problem with my whiskey palate or nose or ability, because it does stand out from your single malt.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe it's the new oak. You mentioned you do a new oak or ex bourbon.
We no, it's all brand new American white oak.
Yeah, because it's already spicy and oaky and full of rye bread. Now I will say, I probably have more rye in my shelf. It's a toss up. I probably have a real mix of what we've got here, single malt and rye. But I have a lot of rye.
Yeah, it's fun to do. Rye is unique, and it's
Now, unique. Now, hang on. One thing I should ask you, Gordon, because a number of people talk about this who make this stuff like you do. I don't. I just enjoy what you make. Is that rye is tough to work with? It's gummy. It isn't an easy grain. I've heard that over and over. Is that true for you guys, or you've got the knack?
It's totally true. But it's sort of like in the beginning, you get mashes that are completely stuck. We do once in a while too, but we've got it pretty well nailed down with our enzymes and stuff like that. So it's not that bad anymore, but definitely it's a lot tougher to work with than malt, malted barley for sure.
Well, fair enough.
And I think there's sort of an idea that rye is just it's a mixer. You use it, rye and Coke. You use it in all your different drinks. But I think
outside of this space, Gordon, yes.
Yeah. But I think now there's a real, if you look at all a lot of the craft distilleries in BC, they're looking to make it like single barrel rye, a special, barrel cask finished, special finishing in rye. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Rye and tequila barrels or whatever. You know what I mean? Like they're treating it the way Scotch is treated, rather than just being a commodity. We're trying to take rye to another level. And
well, your neighbors, the people that actually brought me to say hi to you, Sons of Vancouver, are on that journey too. They are really talking. Rye deserves a seat at the full whiskey table to be treated all the way you just described.
Yeah, totally. And they're doing amazing stuff. Yeah.
And are you we did 3 single malts, kind of I don't know if you call it like a core release, and then you had some special releases, different casks, different peated barley in the vapor basket. Do you do special rye casks and treatments and other releases?
Actually, we haven't done a lot with the rye. The only one that we've done with the rye, or that I have here and that I was having, was we do the maple rye as well, where we take the rye and put it in the ex maple syrup barrels.
Yep. No, I have had an ex maple rye. Maybe not. Oh, I'll come back to that. But I haven't had yours. So
yeah.
Okay. This is okay. For me, it is spicier, but it's not hurting my nose or that kind of biting. That's not what I mean when I say spicy. I've just got more things. When I mentioned that the ex maple syrup, now it's sweeter. So funny what you're nosing, eh?
Yeah.
But this one I said has some Christmas spice. This one now has far more, cinnamon heart and a little bit of peppers and a little bit more spicing right on the nose. Absolutely, yeah. Well, I got to taste this too. So cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, so this one I like the drying nature, a little bit of black tea in there, a little bit of rye breads, I would say, and something else, something Hmm. Okay, I'm going to have to work on that. Something baked. I'm going to come back to that. But I wanted to say to the group, because one thing that I get in American ryes and some Canadian actual ryes, not the ones that just chase the flavor, is like a really herbaceous or dill or menthol or those kind of notes.
Yes.
And that's not the first note here. And I like to say that up front because I almost could sort my ryes into ryes that I think are celebrating that flavor profile,
Right.
and then ryes that aren't celebrating that flavor profile. Because to me, it's a dividing line. It's like people who can taste cilantro and people who can't. It's a thing. I'm not saying it won't come to me. It might be in here. I think all rye grain presents some of that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I just want to say this isn't a dill overwhelming rye for me.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We haven't tried it yet, but I mean, there's so many things that you can play with. Like we were at a conference a while ago, and they were talking about even changing your mash. Something I have to go back to the notes, but they were saying you increase the mash temperature and you can increase the spiciness in your rye.
Oh, I can see that.
So,
yep.
So it's like anywhere along the way, you can tweak what you're doing and it, to try and push it in a certain direction. You know what I mean?
I have a question here from one of the people participating in our conversation. I don't know your name. I'm sorry, Wixomo1. But you did ask a question about what Gordon has. Now, I don't have the rye in X Maple. The one I have is a single malt. But Gordon, you do. Can you talk to that spicy sweet balance that perhaps like a cinnamon roll?
I like the sound of that.
Sure. I love cinnamon rolls. They're one of my favorite things.
Cinnamon
roll. And while you're chasing that, because I don't have it, so you've got to come back with that comment. Tyler just mentions that he often gets dryness, herbaceous, or heavy cherry notes in rye.
Yeah, the spiciness does come through, and in you know what I mean? If it'd be really fun but I don't have it here, to taste the two side by side, the two maples.
That'd be great.
But generally it sort of follows the single malt is more that smooth sipper, and then the rye is a little bit more punchy, a little bit more edgy.
Oh, it's and that follows with your spirits here. This is the last in a small flight of 4 spirits, and it's punchier. Now, it's not punchier like this is hard or this is whatever. That's not what I'm saying, but it definitely fills the palate more and has more. I've said hug. It does. It feels that impression. I think everything I've said is 46%. I think everything you released is 46%, right?
Yeah. Everything we're doing is 46. Yeah.
Yeah. But it has more, little bit of bite on the palate. Not negatively. I'm just saying it like the edges of my tongue have a little bit more bite, that kind of thing, which is great for rye. Tyler mentions he gets a lot of dark cherry or deep cherry in his ryes, and that's great. Maybe not every rye, Tyler, but I'm not saying I would get this here. If I'm going for a fruit note, it would be lighter. You put on the back stone fruit. I don't know if I get the sweetness of, like, when I'm looking at a peach or an apricot or something like that, It's got to be pretty sweet. And I'm not quite getting that here, but I'm getting a nice, softer, sweeter apple a little bit on it. That's where the fruit I would go.
Yeah, I get that for sure. Yeah.
This has been a great flight. I can't show everybody here, but I've got 4 glasses poured across your spirits. We've done your Commodore single malt here. Then we did your single malt in X maple syrup cask, but it was more than that. It also had some smoked maple wood, right?
Yes. Yeah. That was aged separately. Yeah.
And then we talked about every year you put out something to celebrate Robbie Burns.
Yes.
So now I'm curious to see what your third, especially now. I like the idea. Sorry, I'm just going to derail. I was going through all 4 and I got stopped here. You talked about wanting to try to do the peatiest or strongest peat whiskey. That's cool. But then you also did share about local peat, and that might be a sooner goal. I really like that. I've talked to 2 distillers in Alberta now that are trying to get red shed maltings, and I can't remember who else they're working with to do some local peat, like to actually smoke some barley over some Alberta peat bog peat.
Yeah. We it's really sad actually. We used to work with this amazing malting company in Washington called Skagit Valley Malting, and they just out of the blue went out of business. They were expanding, and then they suddenly went out of business. So no one really knows the backstory, or haven't heard it, but they were amazing because they did a lot of this smoking for us. They did a lot of, like, I could phone them up with an idea and say, hey, I've got some arbutus, or I don't know, I could just name something. And they would say, oh yeah, they had a small pilot equipment, a smaller pilot setup, so they could do like 30, 40 bags or something, rather than a big batch. But so we sent them the Burns Bog peat. What else? We sent them some wood, and they would just do it for us. And now we've lost that, so we have to figure out how we're going to do it.
That's tough. Awesome to have those connections. Tough when you lose them. So you'll probably find another. It'll be good.
Yeah, that's right. We need to find. Or what was the red? What was the malting company you mentioned, Alberta?
Oh, Red Shed Malting.
Red Shed,
they're kind of mid Alberta, around Red Deer area. I don't know them, and I actually I've heard so much about them from small distillers in Alberta that I feel like I should call them up just to talk malting. Like, what's it like to do that here in the province? Yeah.
The thing is, I know that kind of the same way where we wouldn't want to use peated malt all the way through our system because you have to. You'd have to clean it so much. I think that's an issue with the maltsters as well. That they would taint their regular malt, right? And then
absolutely. Well, next time you're maybe this is totally wrong. I'm sure it is, but you're about to go in through a pretty deep clean cycle of your equipment. That's when you should run peat for a whole week. Do like the Belgian peat week, just nothing but peat, and then clean the whole system.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yes.
Okay, and the fourth one, just for those who are coming in a bit later in the show, the last one we did is kind of the one we're talking about here, the rye, the prospector, and then you, Gordon, have held up. You have rye in ex maple, which you said definitely has some spice. And earlier we said that maple does add some sweetness. Now, not sweetness like someone just put syrup in that's not the kind of sweetness, but there is an I would say nose and in the single malt. I haven't had what you had, but there is a nosing of some sugars and some.
The sweetness level is the same for sure.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Oh, hey, fellow again, Wixmo1 just commented, is there a spicier rye? It's nothing to do with you guys. So but I'm putting you on the spot, Gordon. If you've sipped a lot of ryes like me, what would be a spicier rye than bullet rye? And I want to say bullet rye for me is spicy because it's also hot. It's a hot rye. It drinks hot. It's 50%. And so it really kicks up the cinnamons and whatnot. But Gordon, you got a Canadian rye that's spicier than do you have a rye spicier than the Prospector here?
Some of the I'm having a brain freeze, but it's made in Alberta. It's your Alberta ryes are.
You mean there's lots of ryes in Alberta.
Yeah.
Were you thinking of the Alberta Premium?
Yes, Alberta Premium. I don't know that one that well, actually.
Alberta Premium in terms of cask strength. If the fellow, especially speaking of being in Detroit, you might be able to get this, but you might not. So I'll have to reach out and comment later and think of an American rye that's got a little more spicy kick.
Does what about Rittenhouse? Does it?
Yeah, Rittenhouse.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
you
think
know,
that might have
and
a little more.
sure. For me, Rittenhouse has a lot more cinnamon, big red gum. So it's got a lot more spice in that sense,
Yes.
for sure. Yeah.
Rittenhouse and Lot 40 combined, if they had a baby, it would be prosperous.
My wife always says, Rittenhouse and Lot 40, if they had a baby, that's ours. That's for us.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And then let's come full circle back to you, not some American rise. Can you share? Because again, people will tune in later, and it's amazing. They catch even the end. What is like exciting on the horizon? What are you willing to share? Not the details, but like what would be kind of cool that maybe my group, people tuning in, would be like, oh, I need to look for that from Odd Society because that was cool.
So I have one, yes, definitely. And we did release one release. And, we've, like I mentioned before, you do experiments and some things work better than others. You sometimes come up with wacky ideas. And so one of those that's just sort of over the top was one we released last year, was a mushroom-infused whiskey. And so it's candy cap mushroom and porcini.
No.
And we sold out in like 2 weeks. We were even at the Victoria Whiskey Festival, and we had a lineup at our table. And they said to us it was the biggest selling whiskey at the event.
No.
Yeah, and it was so.
So what? I mean, what drew people to that? What caught their attention? What was?
I think it just like pure curiosity, like, oh my God, like what are you, mushroom and whiskey, like, but then you taste it, and so the mushroom that's used is candy cap, which is wild forage, but it's more Washington. There's some in BC, but it's more Washington, Oregon.
Okay.
But this really cool thing about the mushroom, when we took our mushroom whiskey and our the single malt maple whiskey, the candy cap mushroom smells like maple. It had more of a maple smell than our maple whiskey.
No way.
And it's a sweet mushroom.
Yeah.
That gives it almost like a maple syrup. And then the porcini gave it that sort of umami flavor.
Yeah.
So it was so we have a collaboration series where we collaborate with people, and the idea came. There was the restaurant that's not around anymore called Wild Thing, and they loved mushrooms. So with the owner and Joel and us in the back, they decided they wanted to do a mushroom, and then and it was just so anyway. All that to say that we're releasing it in probably in another month. We'll have our second mushroom whiskey. So that might be a fun one, because.
Nice. Now I'm going to say, I got some friends in BC, so maybe I got to send them down to your place to get me a bottle and send it my way. But a question I get asked, I haven't had it here in the chat yet, is do you ship out of, now I got a couple of Americans here. Welcome, you guys. Tougher, I'm sure, to get Odd Society in the US. Maybe not. Gordon, you can tell me if I'm
no, we don't ship in the US.
Okay, that's tough.
Yeah.
That's tough for those guys. Sorry, guys. But for other Canadians, are we able to, like, I've got several people here from Ontario. Are you able to, can they order from you?
Absolutely. We have an online store, and you can order anything. We ship across Canada.
Nice. Yeah. And also, I don't know if that's your case, but often your limited releases, the smaller releases, perhaps the second release of the unique mushroom and whiskey, you have a better title than that.
Well, it's a collaboration. It's in our collaboration series, and we just say mushroom infused. Yeah.
Oh, sure. No, that's great. That's great. I just didn't want to do a disservice, Gordon. Yeah. but sometimes because the bottle run is smaller, and
Right.
I'm sure you're in that camp. You know, it's not like you're making 15,000 bottles of the
Yeah, yeah.
collaborative series with mushrooms. It's probably much less than 15,000. So, do you have a newsletter or a way to sign up so that when it's
Uh,
released, people are like, "Oh yeah,
Totally. So if you go on our website, like to the contact page, you can sign up to our newsletter, and we always, prior to the release of a new whiskey, we send out a newsletter and say, hey, it's
okay."
yeah, yeah,
I like it. Well, you've got a person here that says they may even be willing to drive up just to Windsor, Ontario, so they can order a bottle of your whiskey that's been infused with some mushrooms. So that's pretty cool.
yeah. It's
Uh,
fun. It's
you know, Gordon, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you for coming on, for sharing a bit about your journey. You know, how you got into distilling and then refined your craft overseas, and then made it a reality in East Vancouver.
yes,
I really appreciate the samples you sent my way. Thank you, Gordon, uh,
yeah,
and even just the conversation. So I appreciate everything tonight.
yeah. Thank you so much, and thanks for your passion for whiskey and and your great ability to pick out those flavors. You know, that's amazing.
Oh, I don't know. I sure do enjoy it. And Wixom did correct me. I don't want to end on being wrong, which is actually you got to go south to get into Windsor, Ontario. Even though when I think Canada, I think north. U.S., I think south. So thanks for that correction.
Wow,
Uh,
wow, that's funny. Yeah,
Thanks again to everyone who joined
yeah,
us here and those who tune in later. If you want to know more, Gordon has said, on their website, you can sign up for the newsletter, and then you get to know about when releases are coming, and they do ship across Canada. So for all of you that joined us, thanks so much. Gordon, cheers
yeah.
to your health. Thanks for
Yeah.
your
Thank you so much.
kindness.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it, and have a good evening. Yeah. Till
Awesome.
next time.
Cheers.
Cheers.